A pregnant wife was told she could tea or husband luxury vacation because she was T-real family. So she watched them leave and let her mother-in-law believe she had won. But hours later, Chloe boarded a flight of her own. Not to beg for a place beside them, but to step into a better story. Then came the twist no one saw coming. At a breathtaking resort in Costa Rica, Chloe looked across the lobby and saw the one person who was never supposed to be there. Her mother-in-law. And the lie that ruined everything was about to explode.
I know the exact second my mother-in-law, Vivian, decided I no longer existed. I was in the kitchen of our Chicago penthouse when she swept in and told my husband, Leo, the flights to Lake Como are booked. I found the most incredible villa, a private boat, a chef, everything. She had this grand, dramatic way of speaking, like she was always on stage. And for a moment, I actually felt a rush of joy. A proper babamoon. But then she paused, the way she always does, right before delivering a blow. She looked right at me, her smile stretched thin, and said, "Of course, dear, this is for core family only. We can't have any unnecessary drama from outsiders on a trip like this." Outsiders. The word felt ice in the warm kitchen. I opened my mouth to protest, but nothing came out. And Leo, my husband, the man who was supposed to be my partner, just stared at his $1,000 shoes and muttered, "Mom," before she waved him off. "Oh, darling, it's for the best. Ava despises long flights, don't you? And you need your quiet time. You'll be much more comfortable here at home." I wanted to scream that I'd backpacked through Asia, that I lived for new stamps in my passport. But my voice was gone. I just forced a smile that felt like it would crack my face and said, "You're so right. I'll be perfectly happy here." But on the inside, I was shattering. That night, I tried again, huddled in our massive bed. "You didn't even stand up for me," I whispered. He just sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Ava, you know what she's like. Arguing with her just pours gasoline on the fire. Can't we just let this one go? Let this one go." My husband was asking me to step aside in my own marriage, to let his mother take him on our babamoon instead. I stared at the ceiling for hours, promising myself this would be the last time I was silenced. In the weeks before their trip, I felt like an intruder in my own home. Vivian would breeze through with custom-made Italian suits for Leo, leaving the invoices from the tailor right on the kitchen counter. Each bill was a five-figure insult, a flashy reminder of the luxury vacation I was banned from. My heart broke a little more each time Leo looked away from his mother's casual cruelty. The morning they left, she gave me a hug that felt like being held by a snake. "Do rest up, dear, for our little heir. We'll be sure to bring you back some lovely Murano glass." Her laugh echoed off the marble as Leo gave me a quick, apologetic kiss, his mind already on a speedboat in Italy with his mother. I watched their car disappear, a giant hole opening up in my chest, and I thought I might just collapse. But I didn't. I shut the door, picked up my phone, and made the call I'd been planning all week.
The voice on the other end.
Pure energy. "So is it time to start the show?" "Yes," I replied, amazed at how steady my voice sounded. "Let's raise the curtain." A few hours later, I boarded a flight, not to just anywhere, but to Lake Como. My best friend Zara is an event planner for tech billionaires. Her address book is a nuclear weapon. When I told her what my psycho mother-in-law was doing, she just cackled and said, "Oh, honey, let her have her little power trip. We're about to make you the star." So while Leo and Vivian were sipping vintage Prosecco on their private jet, I was landing in Milan. Zara had pulled some strings, getting us an invitation to the same exclusive hotel, telling them we were scouting locations for a major tech conference. This place wasn't just fancy, it was on another level. It made other luxury resorts look like roadside inns. The private villas were carved into the cliffs, each with a pool that seemed to melt into the lake. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. Zara squeezed my hand. "See? This is who you are? Don't ever let that woman convince you otherwise." I smiled, but the humiliation was still there. As it turned out, fate had a twisted sense of humor and was about to serve up some drama that even Vivian couldn't have scripted. A couple of days later, Zara and I walked to the main villa to book a spa treatment. As we crossed the Sphinx terrace, I almost dropped my fresh squeezed orange juice. Because there, holding court by the enormous pool, was my mother-in-law. She had been lying the entire time. This whole story was a fraud. My heart started pounding and I wanted to turn and run, but Zara held my arm. "Not a chance," she whispered. "You walk over there like you own this entire lake." My legs felt like jelly as I approached. Vivian was bragging to a group of women about how her genius son, the tech mogul, had swept her away on this exclusive getaway. When her eyes finally found me, her face turned the color of ash. "You," she gasped, like she'd seen a ghost. I gave her my sweetest, fakest smile. "Vivian, what a coincidence." The other women fell silent, sensing a story. My mother-in-law stammered, What are you doing here? I just cocked my head. Oh, I was invited. Zara's client is thinking about this place for a huge product launch, so we're just checking it out. It's absolutely stunning, wouldn't you agree? The women started murmuring, obviously impressed. Vivian's lips pressed into a thin, white line. I swear I saw a vein pulsing in her forehead. Later, she cornered me near the gardens. You were supposed to be resting at home. You had no right to follow us. I met her gaze directly. Following you was never on my itinerary. She was about to snap back when the hotel concierge hurried over, gushing over Zara and me, telling us what an honor it was to have us as guests. Vivian's mouth literally fell open. For the first time since I met her, she wasn't the most powerful woman in the vicinity. I was. The look on her face, that perfect mix of pure shock and impotent rage, was more satisfying than any revenge plot I could have ever cooked up. But that high, that feeling of victory, doesn't last. Over the next few days, I saw that the real win wasn't just embarrassing Vivian. It was finding my own strength again and knowing I didn't need her approval or even Leo's flimsy backup to have value. But I won't pretend it wasn't fun watching her face sour every time a staff member treated me like royalty. All day, I wandered the resort with a sense of self-worth I hadn't felt in ages, the warm Italian air healing something broken deep inside me. And with every glimpse of me, Vivian's smile got tighter, her flawless composure starting to fray at the edges. By dinner, she looked like she was chewing on rocks. I was eating with Zara at a perfect table overlooking the water as the sun set. I could feel Vivian's toxic glare from across the restaurant, her face a storm cloud, as the sommelier personally invited Zara and me to a private tour of the wine cellar the next day. You're getting the full celebrity experience, Zara whispered with a grin, and I actually laughed out loud. But my stomach was a mess of excitement and fear. This was more than just about a vacation. This was about taking my life back. Later that night, my phone vibrated. It was Leo. Hey, he began, his voice trying too hard to be normal. Mom mentioned you were getting some good rest at home. I nearly snorted. That's funny, I said, my voice slow and deliberate. Because I'm not at home. I'm at Lake Como. The line went completely silent. Then, Lake Como? What in the world are you talking about? I looked out at the moon on the water. I'm talking about your mother lying directly to your face. She told you I was too sick to travel, but she's here, staying at the exact same hotel. I heard Leo's sharp intake of breath, the sound of his perfect little world starting to fracture. I didn't know. She said she invited you and you turned her down. His voice faded. And you just believed her, Leo? You were okay with letting her push me out of our own life, to erase me from the picture? My voice was trembling, but with fury this time, not pain. Do you have any idea what that felt like? To watch my husband just nod and go along with her games? He let out a long, defeated sigh. I was just trying to keep the peace. You know how she is. I swallowed hard. And what about me, Leo? Do you even care how I am? The silence told me everything. Finally, he said, I'm booking the first flight. I'll be there by morning. But I hesitated, a sudden cold wave of doubt hitting me. Did I really want him here? I was up all night, dreaming of Vivian's condescending smile and the sound of lapping water. The next day, Zara practically dragged me to a Pilates session on the lawn. You can't let her colonize your brain, she insisted, moving into a perfect plank. This is your trip! She's just a bitter side character who thinks she's the lead. I tried to smile, but my stomach twisted when I saw Vivian on the other side of the lawn, making a huge performance of ignoring me with her new friends. Zara saw my expression and whispered, so predictable. All right, time for Act 2. We started chatting and laughing, maybe a little louder than necessary. We moved through the exercises, and when the instructor complimented my form in front of the whole class, I could see Vivian's smile twitch. After, she cornered me at the espresso bar. What exactly is your game? She hissed, her voice barely a whisper. I just looked at her. I'm sorry. Her eyes were like tiny daggers. You are doing this on purpose to make me look like a fool. I just tilted my head, my voice completely level. Vivian, you've spent the last year trying to make me feel invisible. If you're embarrassed right now, that has nothing to do with me. That's just reality catching up with you, dot model. She just froze, mouth agape, utterly blindsided, and for a split second I saw raw panic in her eyes. Not fear of me, but of her meticulously crafted world imploding. Later that night, Ethan finally came home, looking exhausted and ashamed. He found me staring out at the city lights, and his eyes flickered between me and his mother. We have to talk, he said, guiding me away. Yes, I replied, my voice dangerously quiet. We certainly do. He ran a hand through his hair. I didn't know she lied. She told me you were sick, that you didn't want to come. I was a fool. I'm so sorry. His apology rang true, but that cold, heavy stone in my stomach wasn't moving. Don't you get it, Ethan? This was never about a wine-tasting weekend. This was about respect. Your mother has dismissed me as nothing since day one, and you just let it happen. His shoulders slumped. I was just trying to avoid a fight. I shook my head, my voice shaking with a rage I couldn't contain. This isn't avoiding a fight, Ethan. This is picking a side. He looked at me, truly looked at me, and I watched the shame wash over his face. I can't lose you, he whispered. My throat closed up, but before I could speak, Beatrice swept into the room. Ethan, darling, don't let her cause a scene. She thrives on this kind of melodrama. He turned to his mother, and for the first time ever, he didn't back down. No, Mom, you caused the scene. You lied to my face, and you lied to my wife. You tried to manipulate my marriage, and I was too much of a coward to stop you. But that ends right now. My heart did a little flip, something it hadn't done in ages. That weekend, the estate hosted its annual harvest dinner, and I sat with Ethan on one side and his sister Chloe on the other, watching the fog roll over the vineyards. Beatrice sat 3 tables away, completely by herself. Her socialite friends were whispering, keeping their distance, smelling the drama. For the first time, she wasn't holding court. I should have loved it, but honestly, I just felt a strange twinge of pity. Because no matter what, she was still Ethan's mother. And this entire conflict wasn't just between the two of us. It was ripping the man I loved right down the middle. After the main course, while people were mingling, I walked over to her table. She saw me approaching and her entire posture went rigid, like she was bracing for impact. Instead, I kept my voice down. I don't want a war, Beatrice. I just want to feel like I belong in this family, not like some hired help. Her expression flickered for just a moment before the mask of indifference slammed back into place. You think it's that easy? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. I shrugged. Maybe, or maybe you're just afraid that if you let me in, you'll lose your grip on things. But I don't want your control. I just want a little respect. She looked away, fiddling with the clasp on her designer clutch. Respect has to be earned. I just gave a slow nod, and so does love. I turned and walked off before she could say another word, leaving her alone with that thought hanging between us. Later that night, Ethan and I talked for hours on our private terrace, watching a storm brew in the distance. He swore he would finally establish some real boundaries, that our marriage would be the priority, not his mother's whims. And for the first time, after watching him actually stand up to her, I believed him. The rest of the weekend was still tense, but the dynamic had fundamentally shifted. Beatrice could still fire off a sarcastic comment, but her words felt hollow now, like they had lost their power. The next morning, I caught her watching me as I was laughing with Chloe and Ethan over breakfast. And for a second, her expression wasn't hostile. It was something else entirely. And I realized that buried under all that pride was a deep-seated fear, the fear of being forgotten as her son built a life that no longer revolved around her. It didn't make her actions okay, but it made her human, and it helped some of my own white-hot anger begin to cool. On our last day, while we were packing, she came up to me out of the blue. You carried yourself with grace, she said, her eyes fixed on the painting just over my head. It was hardly an apology, but coming from her, I knew it was the closest I would ever get. I offered a small smile, thank you. As our car pulled away, I knew things were a long way from perfect. But the rules of the game had changed. I was no longer the outsider, begging for a scrap of their approval. I had found my own power, and Beatrice had learned I wasn't some timid girl she could just roll over. More importantly, Ethan had learned that too. And in that quiet moment, listening to the tires on the gravel road, I felt a sense of peace and of finally belonging that had been missing for so long. When we got back to the city, I didn't just unpack clothes from Napa. I unpacked a new, resilient strength that Beatrice could no longer diminish. I braced for a return to the old dynamic, but I was different, stronger, like I was a new woman forged in that vineyard fire. But the ceasefire was temporary, because Beatrice was not a woman who knew how to surrender. That much was obvious 2 weeks later when she appeared at our penthouse unannounced. The sharp click of her heels is in the hallway sounding like a warning shot. Her eyes did that familiar, critical scan of my outfit, but this time I didn't flinch. Ethan opened the door with a carefully blank face as she breezed past him carrying a box of fancy macarons, as if a little sugar could fix the poison between us. I think it's time we talked, she announced, settling into our armchair like she owned the place. I sat across from her, my heart beating a calm, steady rhythm, determined not to be the girl she thought she knew. She cleared her throat, her perfectly manicured nails tapping the pastry box. I know things in Napa got complicated, but family needs to support one another, don't you agree? I just lifted an eyebrow. Family needs to respect one another, I replied, my voice even and cool. Ethan nodded beside me, his presence a solid support, not a flimsy screen. Beatrice's mouth tightened into a thin, hard line, completely unaccustomed to being met with a united front. I'm simply worried about Ethan, she said, aiming her words at him as if I had vanished. He has always been so tender-hearted, and I would hate to see him taken advantage of. A hot surge of anger shot through me, but before I could say a word, Ethan cut her off. Mom, I'm not being taken advantage of. I'm a grown man, and my wife is not your rival. She is my partner. If you can't accept that, then you're the one choosing to put this distance between us. Her eyes widened at his words, and I could almost see a dozen cutting retorts form and die on her lips as her pride warred with her fear. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity, until she finally whispered, I never meant to lose you, Ethan. My own throat tightened, because right then I saw a mother terrified of becoming irrelevant, not some wicked villain. And while one part of me was still livid, another part of me actually felt for her. You won't lose him, I said softly, the words surprising even me. But you are going to lose both of us if you keep trying to cut me out of his life. She looked at me then. She actually saw me. As if for the first time she saw a woman who loved her son, not an adversary. And I saw a subtle shift in her eyes, a strange mix of defiance and a reluctant surrender. After that day, things didn't magically get better, but small changes began to happen. She would still make the occasional snide comment, but Ethan would shut it down instantly. And sometimes, when she thought I wasn't looking, I'd catch her dropping the high society act, just watching me with a puzzled expression, like she was trying to figure me out. A few months passed, and on a foggy city morning, 2 little blue lines showed up on a pregnancy test. My hands were shaking, a wild mix of overwhelming joy and sheer panic. When I showed Ethan, he just wrapped me in his arms, and we stood there laughing and crying all at once. We're going to have a family, he whispered, and for a moment, everything felt absolutely perfect. But then my thoughts went straight to Beatrice. How on earth would she react? We decided to tell her over a painfully quiet family dinner. She froze with her fork halfway to her mouth. Then, to my absolute astonishment, her eyes filled with tears. A grandchild, she whispered, her voice completely breaking. I never thought she trailed off, and then she looked directly at me with a raw honesty that completely disarmed me. Congratulations, she said. And for the very first time in our entire relationship, it actually sounded like she meant it. In the months that followed, something truly began to shift. She'd bring over little baby clothes, or call just to ask how my last appointment went. Even though her advice was usually couched in criticism, I could sense a genuine effort underneath it all. Some days I wanted to throw it all back in her face, to remind her of the hurt she caused. But then the baby would kick, and I chose to look ahead, not for her, but for us. The night I went into labor was complete and utter chaos. Ethan was a wreck, pacing the hospital corridor while I tried to remember how to breathe. It was Beatrice, of all people, who took control, getting us checked in with a calm, no-nonsense focus I had never seen in her before. Hours later, as I held our daughter, Lily, against my skin, I saw Beatrice standing in the doorway, tears just silently rolling down her cheeks. And for the first time, I didn't see a competitor. I saw a grandmother, completely unguarded and real. When she finally approached the bed, her hands were trembling as she asked, "May I hold her?" I nodded, and she took Lily with a tenderness that made my own eyes well up. "She's just perfect," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. And right there, something inside me started to heal. It wasn't some magic fix, it couldn't erase what happened, but it gave me hope. Then came the new baby chaos, no sleep, endless diapers, and a love so huge it made it all worthwhile. Catherine was over constantly, sometimes stepping way over the line, other times being surprisingly kind. I was still on guard, but I started seeing her differently. Through my daughter's eyes, Lily would just beam the second her grandmother was there. And I guess that what family is. It's not about being flawless. It's about screwing up and then finding a way to fix it together. Thinking back, if Catherine hadn't tried to keep me out of that gala, I don't think I'd be this strong. Ethan and I might not have worked through the stuff that made us unbreakable. She didn't just find me crashing her party that night. She found the beginning of the end of her total control, maybe a new path for her, and I realized my value wasn't up to her. I was already enough. Sometimes a huge rejection just points you toward your own truth. Motherhood just tore me wide open. It took all my walls down, left me totally raw, but it also gave me this strength I never knew existed. Those long nights with my daughter Lily asleep on me, they changed how I saw everything. I thought about Catherine and wondered if her anger was just a cover for her own fear. No matter why she did it, she was in our lives now. So I started letting the anger fade, not for Catherine, but for Lily. I would not raise my daughter in the crossfire of old battles. Ethan started stepping up too, in ways I never saw coming. He drew a hard line with his mother, making it clear our little family came first. It wasn't a magic wand, there were still fights, tense calls, and times Catherine would revert to her old self. But it was different, because Ethan didn't back down. He was with me. That feeling of being a team mended things in me I thought were permanently broken. Then one bitter cold night, nearly a year after that Chicago gala, Catherine invited us for dinner. I was anxious, but Ethan just squeezed my hand. "Let's go see what this is about," he said. The house smelled of roasted garlic when we arrived, and Catherine's welcome actually felt genuine for once. It wasn't that tight, polite smile I was used to. This one had warmth. Dinner started off a little stiff, of course, but she asked about my design work, about Lily, and she even said she liked my scarf. I was braced for the backhanded compliment, but it never came. After we ate, Ethan took Lily upstairs, leaving me alone with Catherine. The silence was thick. She poured us some tea, and then she said it. "I was so unfair to you." I think my heart stopped. I just stared, waiting for the catch, but all I saw was how exhausted she seemed. "I thought if I kept you away, Ethan would somehow stay my son. That he wouldn't grow up," she said, her voice shaking. In that moment, I saw the scared person she kept hidden. "But he's a man now, and that's not on you. It's on me for not wanting to see it." I could barely swallow. I'd imagined her apologizing 1,000 times, but never thought it would happen. "I never tried to take him from you," I whispered. "I just loved him." She just nodded, her eyes wet. "I know that now. It wasn't some big movie scene, just a tiny crack in the ice between us. And that was enough." Life settled into a new rhythm. We juggled our jobs, a toddler, and a fragile truce with Catherine. Sometimes she'd shock me with her kindness babysitting without a single critique, or dropping off dinner without a lecture. Seeing her with Lily, I'd glimpse the person she might have been, if fear hadn't warped her love into a need for control. But it wasn't a fairy tale. Her old self would still surface with little jabs about our parenting. When that happened, I'd just breathe and remember that healing isn't linear. Forgiveness isn't a switch you flip once, it's a decision you make over and over. But the arguments were smaller, manageable, because I wasn't that intimidated girl anymore. That spring, my friend Sarah came over. "Wow," she said over coffee, "you've come a long way from that panicked call about Chicago. Who thought that mess would solve everything?" I laughed. "Chicago didn't solve it. I did when I realized I didn't need her approval to be happy." Sarah lifted her cup. To happiness, no permission needed. We touched our mugs, and I was just so thankful for her, for this crazy ride I'd been on. The next challenge wasn't far off. That summer, Ethan proposed a family vacation. With all of us, including Catherine. My gut reaction was pure dread. A whole week stuck with her? All the old fears came flooding back. But then I saw my daughter running around the room, and I wanted her to have memories of a complete family, not a broken one. So I agreed. We found a little house near the beach, and to my total surprise, it was actually nice. Catherine actually helped in the kitchen and told old stories about Ethan growing up. We hit a few bumps, like when she insisted Lily needed a wool blanket in 80-degree weather. But Ethan shut it down gently, so I didn't have to. Then one night by the fire, she looked at me and said, so quietly, "You are a good mother." Those 4 little words hit me right in the chest, like a key turning in a lock that had been rusted shut for years. I smiled through my tears. "Thank you." And I got it. The woman who fought to keep me out was finally, carefully, letting me in. Our story wasn't perfect, but it was real. But I knew I was different now. I could face whatever came next, because my worth came from the love I gave, not the validation I chased. Years on, when my daughter was older, I told her our family's stories, the beautiful and the painful. Because family isn't about having no problems. It's about what you do after the break. Do you build a bridge or let the canyon stay? And in that moment, watching Catherine rock our daughter to sleep, I knew the scars remained. But they also proved that love, even complicated, messy love, was always worth the fight. The years went by and life found a steady rhythm. Ethan's architecture firm was doing great. I loved being a mom and doing my own thing part-time. Our daughter grew into a curious little girl with endless questions. And Catherine was a constant presence. What once felt like a hurricane had become more like a predictable season. Her old habits would surface, like insisting Lily take ballet for proper grace. But I didn't feel cornered anymore. I'd just smile and say, "We'll see what she loves, Catherine." And Ethan's calm voice would be right there beside me, showing we were united. And Catherine would sigh, but she'd let it go. And every time she did, without it turning into a war, I felt our family find its footing a little more. The past wasn't totally gone, though. One afternoon, I remembered her telling me I wasn't welcome in Chicago, and the old hurt flared up. But then I heard my daughter laughing with Ethan in the other room, and the pain receded. It was the fire I walked through, not the room I lived in. I still had the scar, but now I also had the strength. Years later, Sarah visited again. We were on the patio watching our kids play when she leaned in and whispered, So, how is Her Majesty? I laughed. She's adapting. Imagine a snow leopard learning to be a house cat. Sarah snorted. Just don't let her get her claws out. You've earned this peace. And she was right. Catherine and I had a fragile peace, built on constant work, patience, and solid boundaries. The next big test of that peace came when we decided to plan another family trip. This was a vacation we were planning together. When Ethan asked if we should invite his mom, my stomach clenched. The memory of being excluded flashed in my mind. But I took a breath and said, yes, let's. I realized if she once closed a door on me, the real victory wasn't doing the same to her, it was opening one myself. We chose a quiet beach town, nothing fancy, just a place with lots of sand for our daughter. Catherine arrived with her mountain of bags and advice, but surprisingly, she focused more on her granddaughter than on running the show. One afternoon, Ethan took our daughter down to the water, leaving Catherine and me on the deck. The ocean breeze was cool. She took a breath and stared out at the waves. You know, she started, I always thought no one would be right for Ethan. It wasn't about them. It was about me not wanting to let him go. But I see how happy he is with you. I see how much you care about this family. Her words were a bit clunky, but they landed. I gave a little smile. That's all I've ever wanted. For loving him to be enough. She turned and really met my gaze, and her eyes weren't cold anymore. They were warm, maybe even proud. And in that moment, it all clicked. Eleanor S. War was never about me. It was about her sheer terror of losing her son. That realization stung, but it also freed me. That night, Liam toasted to family, his eyes finding mine, full of love. Eleanor even cracked a smile at our daughter's laugh. It wasn't perfect, and we still had our tense moments, but it felt real. Looking back on the whole journey, the humiliation, the fight in Tuscany, the slow rebuilding, I don't just see a conflict. I see a story about earning respect by simply refusing to be erased, especially when people are trying to make you feel small. And now I see with the kind of clarity that only comes with time, that what Eleanor found at that villa wasn't just me. It was the beginning of her own journey of letting go, of learning to share her son and her family. And what I found was freedom, the certainty that I always belonged, no matter how hard she tried to convince me I didn't. Because belonging is something you build with love and find in your own strength, not something you're given. And over time, I saw how that whole messy conflict with Eleanor showed me who I truly was. Liam and I became a true team, facing things with patience and humor. We learned to communicate and draw lines that let Eleanor be a grandmother without being a dictator. Our daughter's laughter filled every room, her constant questions a beautiful reminder to stay in the moment. And Eleanor did change piece by piece over the years. Look, she never became some warm, fuzzy mother-in-law from a movie, and she never really got me. But she learned respect. She'd ask for my input, help without judgment, and offer advice that actually sounded like a suggestion, not a demand. The old tension would still flare up sometimes, a pointed comment, a certain glance, but I learned how to not let it sink in, to answer calmly and let Liam handle it if things got worse. One afternoon, getting ready for our daughter's birthday, I saw Eleanor on the floor, blowing up balloons with our little girl. She looked up and actually smiled at me. For a second, the past felt a million miles away. I never thought I'd be any good at this, she admitted quietly. I smiled back, feeling a warmth spread through me. It's easier when you're not trying to control it, I said. And she laughed, a real laugh, and nodded. These were the moments that wove us into a real family. We started going on trips together, just to simple, quiet places. I watched Eleanor discover she could enjoy her son's family without needing to orchestrate every single second. Our daughter, older now, saw her grandma changing, asking questions that showed us all how simple love is supposed to be. Then one spring morning, a decade after Tuscany, I was sitting on the porch with Eleanor, watching our daughter play. The sun was warm. She looked at me, and her expression was a mix of her old fire and something new. A softness, maybe even a little bit of humility. You know, you changed me, she said, her voice just a whisper. My heart skipped a beat. You certainly didn't make it easy for me, I replied with a little smile. But I hope I showed you we could find a way to coexist, she said, a faint smile on her own lips. More than coexist, you showed me patience and respect and love. I blinked, stunned by how genuine she sounded. Love, I repeated. Yes, I think I've been learning what that is in my own clumsy way. We sat in silence for a bit, listening to the birds, knowing that some scars never fully heal, but some bridges, once built, are strong enough for any storm. For years, I kept a journal about it all, from feeling like an outcast to finding my own peace. I realized that the revenge I used to fantasize about wasn't what I wanted at all. I just wanted peace. I wanted to feel like I belonged and to be loved for who I am, even by the people who fought so hard to push me out. Liam was my rock through everything. supporting me in big and small ways, proving that love could be patient and strong. He taught me that a partnership is built on equality, not on power. And Eleanor, as complicated as ever, became part of our family's rhythm. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours, with enough space for everyone to grow. Our daughter grew up bright and kind, full of wonder. I would watch her navigate little dramas on the playground with a confidence I know came from us. She saw her parents stand up for each other, gently but firmly, and learned that even difficult people deserve to be treated with respect. One evening, during a quiet dinner, I saw Eleanor watching me again. But this time, her look wasn't critical. It was thoughtful, almost peaceful. I could see just how far she'd come from the woman who tried to cut me out of that trip years ago. "I have to admit," she said, breaking the silence, "I really did underestimate you." I just smiled, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. "I hope you learned something," I said. She smiled and nodded. "More than something. I learned about respect, patience, and maybe a little humility." A huge weight just lifted off my shoulders, bringing a peace I never knew was possible. The road here was long and incredibly hard, but it led to this very moment, to a messy but strong family, held together by love and a real desire to understand. In the years that followed, we celebrated everything: birthdays, holidays, anniversaries. Every party was a small victory, a little reminder that even broken families can heal. And I never forgot that moment in Tuscany when I flat out refused to be left behind. That was the moment I found my strength. I learned that standing up to that kind of unfairness was the first real step to getting my life back on track. It's a lesson that never left me. The simple knowledge that I could face down any challenge, that being pushed aside can actually make you stronger, and that real love, the kind built on respect, can soften even the most stubborn hearts. As I look around now, with Eleanor quietly helping our daughter on a school project and Liam reading next to me, I get it. What was waiting for her at that villa wasn't just me. It was the beginning of her own transformation, one that was long overdue. And what was waiting for me was a life filled with love, strength, and the knowledge that I always belonged. Not because anyone gave me permission, but because I claimed my space and refused to let go of this family. The final years of our journey with Eleanor weren't about big, dramatic blow-ups anymore. They were about small, quiet wins. I realized the victory wasn't watching her lose her grip. It was the peace that came from taking back my own life and creating a family where respect finally mattered more than control. Sure, we still had tense moments. Eleanor would always be stubborn and could slip into old habits. But those moments didn't define us anymore, and they couldn't touch the strength I'd built inside. Liam and I became even closer, navigating parenting with a confidence that only comes from weathering a storm together. Our daughter, a little tornado in preschool, had learned lessons we never had to spell out for her. She knew how important it was to stand up for herself, to be patient, and that people really can change. It just takes time. Eleanor's place in our lives shifted. She was no longer this terrifying judge of my every move, but just a part of our family. Sometimes she was awkward or a little too eager, but she was trying. She was learning the boundaries she had to respect and how to show her love without trying to control it. One sunny afternoon, we were all in the backyard as our daughter chased butterflies. Eleanor looked at me with a softness I'd never seen before. "You are a wonderful mother," she said, her voice so genuine. "I see how strong you are. I see how much Liam relies on you, not just as a wife, but as the true anchor of this family." A wave of emotion washed over me, a mix of old pain and new warmth, and I just smiled. "Thank you," I said quietly. "It wasn't always easy, but we made it work." She just nodded. For the first time, I felt a real change in her. She wasn't just acknowledging me anymore. She was admitting that her mission to break me had failed completely. Liam, who had been watching us, reached out and took my hand. "We did it," he whispered. "We actually survived." I squeezed his hand, feeling that steady love that got us through everything. Our life found a peaceful rhythm. Holidays were filled with laughter instead of tension, with Eleanor offering advice, not commands. We were just living in the messy, wonderful reality of our family. Our daughter thrived in this new atmosphere, becoming a kid who understood kindness and setting boundaries. She didn't learn it from lectures. She learned it by watching her parents face their problems with courage and love. Then one evening, as the sun set, Eleanor came to me. In her hands was a small, elegantly wrapped box. "This is for you," she said softly. Inside was a silver locket with our 3 initials engraved on it. A simple gift, but it meant the world. "I want you to know," she said, "that you belong here. You always did, even when I was too proud to see it." My throat tightened as tears welled in my eyes. I knew then that the long, painful road from that awful trip in Tuscany to this quiet moment of peace was finally over. I hugged her, and for the first time, I felt a genuine warmth between us, something I thought was impossible. It hit me right then you can't just erase the past, but you can always choose to start over. In the following years, our family grew so much stronger. Liam and I became an unbreakable team. Eleanor's visit started to feel less like a duty and more like a real chance to connect with us. And our daughter's laughter, it filled every single corner of our house with pure joy. I learned that family isn't about winning arguments or trying to control people. It's about honesty, standing up for your beliefs, and showing kindness even to those who've hurt you. It's funny. We look back now on things that felt like the absolute end of the world, that canceled trip to Tuscany, the terrible argument in Greece, all those cold years, and we actually smile. We can see now how those awful moments actually forged the family we have today. We are not perfect, not even close, but we're strong, held together by something that feels thicker than blood. Watching my daughter, I know she won't grow up with the same drama and fear that defined us. She's going to inherit the strength, the courage, and the wisdom we had to fight so hard for. She's learning that while you can't change other people, you can always choose how you react, set your own boundaries, and always choose love. Eleanor, older now and much softer, finally learned how to just be with us. She figured out how to show love without trying to manage everything, and to accept that her son's happiness wasn't taking from her, it was adding to the beautiful, messy life we all shared. And as for me, I finally found my backbone, my own voice. I realized that belonging isn't something people just give you. You have to claim it for yourself, you have to protect it, and you have to live it out every single day. The memory of her shutting me out, making me feel invisible, is now just a reminder of my own quiet victory. What she found waiting at that resort years ago wasn't just me, it was a lesson in love that she couldn't ignore any longer. I learned that respect, love, and your own integrity are the only things that truly matter, that you can never really control another person's journey, and that real strength isn't loud. It's quiet, it's steady, and it never ever quits. What was waiting for me was everything I had fought for. A life just bursting with love, our little family, and so much laughter. I felt this deep satisfaction, knowing I hadn't just survived her judgment, I had emerged stronger, smarter, and finally seen for who I really was. Tucking our daughter into bed that night, telling her stories about brave heroes, I felt the peace of our long journey settle deep in my bones. Eleanor stood in the doorway, just smiling. And I knew the very story we thought would tear us apart had become the foundation we would build our future on. It would teach our kids that even the most difficult relationships can heal, that love always wins, and that belonging is something we make together, one day at a time. Model.